History remembers the flames, but it rarely remembers the engineers. This is not just a story about war, or siege, or medieval brutality. This is a story about chemistry guarded as a state secret, about mechanical innovation hidden beneath naval decks, about knowledge so powerful it was locked away and taken to the grave. Because Greek fire was not a legend. It was deployed, documented, and for nearly 5 centuries, it protected the greatest city in the medieval world, Constantinople. But here's the unsettling truth. We know it existed. We know it worked. We know it changed history. Yet we still do not know exactly how it was made. And that mystery may tell us more about power than about fire. To understand Greek fire, you must first understand Constantinople. In the 7th century, it was the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a city of perhaps 500,000 people, fortified by the massive Theodosian walls, protected on 3 sides by water. To the west, Europe. To the east, Asia. To the south, the restless forces of a rising caliphate. After the rapid expansion of the early Islamic Caliphate in the 630s and 640s, Byzantine territories collapsed one by one. Syria fell. Egypt fell. North Africa slipped away. The empire was shrinking, but Constantinople remained. And as long as it remained, Byzantium survived. The city's defenses were legendary. Triple-layered land walls, massive towers, a colossal chain stretched across the Golden Horn to block enemy ships. Yet walls alone were not enough. Because by the mid-7th century, the Umayyad Caliphate had built a formidable navy. Arab fleets now challenged Byzantine dominance in the Mediterranean. The war was no longer fought only on land. It was fought at sea. And at sea, walls offer no protection. By 674 CE, the first major Arab siege of Constantinople began. For years, fleets launched repeated assaults, attempting to starve and overwhelm the capital. The Byzantines faced a terrifying reality. If Constantinople fell, there would be no Eastern Roman Empire, no imperial treasury, no centralized administration, no orthodox stronghold. The map of Europe, and perhaps the entire Mediterranean world, would change. And so desperation breeds innovation. According to later Byzantine chroniclers, around this time a Syrian or Greek engineer named Kallinikos, sometimes described as a refugee from Heliopolis, arrived in Constantinople. He brought with him knowledge, a formula, a weapon. The sources are frustratingly sparse. Theophanes the Confessor, writing in the 9th century, credits Kallinikos with introducing the weapon to the Byzantines. Other accounts vary in detail but agree on one thing. Something new appeared, something devastating, and it was deployed from ships. Now here is where the story becomes more technical. Greek fire was not merely a substance. It was a system. It required a combustible liquid, a storage container, a pressurization mechanism, a projecting siphon, and an ignition method. This was not a bucket of flaming oil thrown overboard. It was engineered projection. Byzantine ships reportedly mounted bronze tubes, siphons, at their prows. These functioned almost like primitive flamethrowers. Think about that for a moment. In the 7th century, naval flamethrowers. The operator would pump the mixture through a pressurized chamber. Once expelled, it ignited, possibly through a heated metal tip or a burning wick at the nozzle. And when it struck enemy ships, the effect was catastrophic. Wooden hulls ignited instantly. Sails caught flame. Panic spread faster than the fire itself. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect was psychological. Arab chroniclers described the weapon with awe and horror. They did not fully understand what it was, only that it burned unnaturally. It floated. It could not easily be extinguished with water, which leads us to the chemical mystery. Most modern scholars suspect that Greek fire was petroleum-based. The Byzantine Empire had access to natural naphtha deposits around the Black Sea region. Petroleum burns on water. Additives like sulfur or quicklime could intensify ignition. Resin might increase stickiness. But the precise composition remains unknown. Because unlike Roman engineering manuals, unlike Greek philosophical treatises, The formula for Greek fire was never openly published. It was classified, restricted, guarded by the state. And that decision, that act of secrecy, may be the reason we are still guessing today. Because knowledge that is hoarded does not spread, and knowledge that does not spread can disappear. And it nearly did, because during the first siege, as Arab fleets pressed in year after year, everything depended on whether this new weapon would hold. The year was 674. For the first time in its long history, Constantinople faced a sustained naval siege. Arab fleets did not simply attack and retreat. They returned season after season, establishing forward bases along the coast of Asia Minor. Each spring, sails reappeared on the horizon. Each winter, both sides regrouped. This was not a single battle. It was a war of endurance. And endurance favors the stronger navy. The Umayyad Caliphate had momentum. Victories across Syria, Egypt, and North Africa had given them access to shipyards, timber, and experienced sailors. Their fleets were growing. Byzantium, meanwhile, was exhausted from decades of war with Persia before facing the Arab expansion. Its treasury strained. Its manpower stretched thin. If the Arab navy achieved maritime dominance in the Bosporus, the city would be starved. So sometime during these desperate years, Greek fire was introduced into naval combat. The sources do not give us a precise day. There is no preserved battlefield diagram. But what we do have are descriptions of devastation. Theophanes records that during the siege, Byzantine ships used liquid fire to burn the Arab fleet. Arab historians later described ships consumed by flames that clung to the surface of the sea. Imagine being an enemy sailor. You close in under cover of darkness. Oars dip quietly. The silhouette of Constantinople looms ahead, walls illuminated by torchlight. Then suddenly, from the prow of a Byzantine dromon, a bronze tube pivots. A pump begins to move, and a roaring stream of fire arcs across the water. Not scattered sparks. A continuous jet. It lands on your deck, and the deck ignites. Water does nothing. Buckets fail. The fire spreads sideways, crawling along planks, climbing ropes. Men leap into the sea, and the sea burns too. Whether every account was exaggerated or not is almost irrelevant, because the weapon worked. The siege dragged on until 678. In the end, the Arab forces withdrew. The Byzantine Empire survived. And here is the crucial turning point. Greek fire did not merely defend the city. It reshaped Mediterranean strategy. Naval warfare changed. Byzantine dromons became feared not for speed alone, but for their flaming projection systems. The empire institutionalized the weapon. It was no longer a one-time invention. It became doctrine. And doctrine requires organization. Greek fire was reportedly produced in controlled facilities within Constantinople. Knowledge of its composition and deployment was restricted to select officials and possibly specific families tasked with its maintenance. The emperor himself was said to oversee aspects of its protection. In some accounts, even allies were denied access. This was not shared innovation. It was strategic monopoly. And that monopoly became legend. When later Arab fleets faced Byzantine forces again in the 8th century, during the second major siege of Constantinople in 717 to 718, Greek fire was deployed once more with devastating effect. Again, ships burned. Again, the city survived. And once again, history tilted. Had Constantinople fallen in the 7th or 8th century, Europe's political and religious landscape would have shifted dramatically. The Byzantine Empire acted as a buffer between Islamic expansion and the rest of Europe for centuries. And Greek fire was one of its shields. But here's the paradox. The more effective a secret weapon becomes, the more tightly it is guarded. And the tighter it is guarded, the more fragile its survival becomes. Because if knowledge lives in too few hands, what happens when those hands disappear? By the 9th and 10th centuries, Byzantine texts still referenced Greek fire. Variants appeared, handheld versions, clay grenades filled with incendiary substances. But the original naval siphon system, the fully integrated projection mechanism, remained uniquely Byzantine. No rival empire successfully replicated it at the same scale. And then, gradually, the references become thinner, more vague. By the late medieval period, descriptions exist, but the detailed formula does not, which suggests something unsettling. Greek fire did not slowly evolve into gunpowder. It did not become a foundation for modern chemical weapons. It simply vanished. A weapon that saved an empire, lost to history, and that disappearance may have begun not in battle, but in the halls of secrecy. To understand why the formula vanished, we must understand how it was protected. Byzantium was not a loose medieval kingdom. It was a highly structured bureaucratic state. Knowledge, especially military knowledge, flowed through controlled channels. Greek fire was not simply mixed in open workshops. It was classified. Some Byzantine sources suggest that the formula was entrusted to a specific corps within the navy. Others imply that it was preserved within the imperial court itself, passed through carefully guarded instruction. There are even later traditions claiming that emperors swore sacred oaths never to reveal its composition, not even to Christian allies. Whether those claims are embellished or not, one fact is clear. No surviving Byzantine manual openly lists the ingredients. And that absence is striking. The Byzantines preserved medical texts, astronomical works, military treatises like the Strategicon. Engineering knowledge on fortifications and siegecraft survived in written form. Yet when it comes to Greek fire, we encounter silence. But because secrecy was strategic, if rival powers understood the mixture, if they identified its volatile base, they could replicate it. And replication meant parity. So the formula was likely compartmentalized. Perhaps one group handled distillation of petroleum derivatives. Another managed storage and transport. Another operated the siphon mechanisms during battle. If no single artisan knew every step, the full knowledge remained centralized. Brilliant for defense, dangerous for posterity. And there is another complication. Greek fire was not static. Descriptions across centuries suggest variations. Some accounts describe explosive sounds. Others mention thick smoke. Some suggest handheld projectors in addition to naval siphons, which implies ongoing refinement. But refinement requires continuity, and continuity depends on political stability. By the 10th century, Byzantium experienced a resurgence under emperors like Basil II. The empire expanded again. Greek fire remained in use, but stability in Byzantium was never permanent. Internal coups, court intrigue, civil wars. Knowledge tied to specific factions could disappear overnight. And if the formula was known only to a narrow elite, perhaps even a single lineage of engineers, then all it would take was one lost workshop, one destroyed archive, one executed official, and the chain would break. The more historians examine Greek fire, the more they realize it was as much mechanical as chemical. The substance alone was not enough. It had to be delivered. Byzantine warships, particularly the dromon, were highly specialized vessels. Long, fast, and maneuverable, they were built for Mediterranean warfare. Mounted at the prow was the siphon, a bronze tube reinforced and angled forward. Behind it, hidden beneath the deck, was a pressure chamber, likely powered by manual pumps operated by trained crew. This was coordinated warfare. One team prepared the mixture. Another pressurized the system. Another aimed the nozzle. Another managed ignition. And ignition was not trivial. If the flame ignited too early, the ship itself could burn. If pressure faltered, the stream would sputter and fail. Which means Greek fire was not a miracle weapon. It was a disciplined system requiring training and precision. Arab fleets attempted to counter it. Some sources suggest they tried covering ships with wet hides. Others experimented with sand or vinegar to suppress flames. But even if partial defenses were possible, the psychological effect remained enormous. And here is where legend begins to merge with strategy. Accounts describe flames roaring with unnatural force. They describe fire that followed ships. Some even speak of thunder-like explosions. Modern scholars caution that medieval chroniclers often amplified dramatic effect. Yet even with exaggeration removed, the core reality stands. Greek fire dominated naval engagements for centuries. But that dominance came at a cost. Because when a weapon becomes central to military identity, it becomes a symbol. And symbols must be protected. Over time, the Byzantine state treated Greek fire not merely as technology, but as divine favor. Some chroniclers framed it as a gift from God, a sacred instrument defending Orthodox Christianity. And once a weapon becomes sacred, questioning it becomes dangerous. Innovation slows, critical evaluation diminishes, and secrecy deepens. If rival states could not access the formula, even Byzantine engineers outside the inner circle might have had limited understanding of its full composition, which means knowledge was layered. And layered knowledge is vulnerable, because if one layer collapses, the system weakens. And in the centuries ahead, the empire itself would begin to fracture. By the 11th century, the world around Byzantium was changing. New powers rose in the Mediterranean. The Normans pressed from the west. The Seljuk Turks advanced from the east. Internal political instability intensified. And with instability comes vulnerability. Greek fire still existed. Anna Komnene, writing in the 12th century in the Alexiad, described its terrifying projection during naval battles against the Normans. She spoke of it as a closely guarded imperial secret. But notice something important. Her description emphasizes secrecy more than composition. She explains how it was deployed. She describes the fear it inspired, but she does not explain how it was made. Even a princess of the imperial court, educated, politically aware, does not provide the formula, which suggests that by her time, access was already extremely restricted. Then came 1204, the Fourth Crusade. Instead of marching to the Holy Land, Crusader armies turned on Constantinople itself. The city was sacked, churches looted, archives destroyed, workshops pillaged. The Byzantine state fractured into successor states struggling for survival. And in chaos, secrets are lost. We cannot definitively say that 1204 ended Greek fire. But after this rupture, references grow rarer. Later Byzantine forces used incendiary weapons, but nothing described with the same technical sophistication. By the time Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, gunpowder artillery had replaced ancient siphons. Cannons thundered against the Theodosian walls. The age of chemical flamethrowers had given way to explosive force. And somewhere between internal strife, crusader devastation, and technological transition, the formula vanished. Not dramatically, not with a final explosion, but quietly, because knowledge that is not widely shared cannot survive systemic collapse. And that is the central paradox of Greek fire. It was powerful enough to save an empire, but too secret to survive it. For centuries, historians asked the wrong question. They asked, what was Greek fire made of? But the more revealing question might be, why was it allowed to disappear? Because here's the twist. Greek fire may not have been a single, miraculous formula. It may have been a controlled industrial process. Modern chemical analysis of medieval incendiaries suggests that petroleum-based substances, particularly naphtha, were widely known in the Near East. Natural seeps existed around the Black Sea and Mesopotamia. Crude oil was not a mystery. What made Greek fire unique was not simply its flammability. It was refinement, stabilization, delivery. The Byzantine advantage may have been logistical, not magical. They knew how to distill, store, pressurize, and project volatile mixtures in a coordinated naval system. In other words, Greek fire was an early example of state-controlled chemical engineering. And that changes everything. Because if it was industrial knowledge, dependent on infrastructure, then its survival required functioning shipyards, supply chains, trained crews, and political continuity. Remove any one of those pillars, and the system weakens. Remove several, and it collapses. After the Fourth Crusade shattered the empire in 1204, Byzantine successor states struggled just to survive. Resources were scarce. Naval dominance faded. Italian maritime powers like Venice and Genoa rose in influence. Byzantium was no longer the dominant naval force of the Eastern Mediterranean. And here's the turning point. When an empire loses control of the sea, it loses incentive to maintain sea-based superweapons. Greek fire was expensive. It required specialized ships, trained operators, access to petroleum supplies. Without strategic naval supremacy, maintaining such a system may have seemed impractical. And then came gunpowder. By the 14th and 15th centuries, explosive artillery transformed warfare. Cannons could breach walls once considered impenetrable. Ironically, Constantinople's final fall in 1453 was not caused by fire on the sea. It was caused by massive Ottoman cannons battering the land walls. The age of projection flame had been overtaken by explosive force, which means Greek fire did not merely vanish from secrecy. It may have been rendered obsolete. And obsolete technology is rarely preserved. Consider how many modern innovations fade once replaced. Without active application, even complex knowledge decays. Engineers retire. Manuals are misplaced. Workshops close. And if Greek fire was already tightly guarded within elite circles, then obsolescence would accelerate disappearance. So perhaps the formula wasn't dramatically lost in a single catastrophic event. Perhaps it simply stopped being renewed. And when the last engineers who understood its refinement died, the knowledge went with them. The empire that once commanded fire over water ended its days beneath cannon smoke. And the formula that saved Constantinople for centuries never resurfaced. Now we arrive at the heart of the mystery. What was Greek fire actually made of? Historians, chemists, and military scholars have debated this for more than a century. Yet no consensus has fully resolved the question. The most widely accepted theory is that Greek fire was petroleum-based, likely refined naphtha. The Byzantine Empire had access to crude oil deposits around the Black Sea, particularly near regions such as modern-day Azerbaijan. Petroleum burns on water. That alone explains one of the most terrifying features described in medieval accounts. But crude oil alone does not create a controlled, projected stream of flame. Something else was added. Sulfur is frequently proposed. It increases combustibility and produces thick, choking smoke. Resin may have been included to create adhesion, allowing the fire to cling to wooden hulls. Quicklime has also been suggested. When quicklime reacts with water, it releases heat. In theory, this could intensify ignition when the mixture struck the sea. However, here is where caution becomes essential. Many modern reconstructions assume a complex chemical cocktail, but medieval sources never list precise ingredients. They describe effect. They describe terror. They describe fire that could not easily be extinguished. And that leaves us with two possibilities. Either the formula was chemically extraordinary, or it was mechanically extraordinary. Some scholars argue that the secret lay less in exotic chemistry and more in controlled projection. A petroleum mixture, when pressurized and ignited through a heated bronze siphon, could create a continuous flame jet. In that case, the brilliance of Greek fire was not the substance itself, but the engineering system behind it. And that system required training, coordination, discipline. It required naval crews who could operate pumps under combat pressure. It required sealed containers capable of storing volatile liquids without premature ignition. One miscalculation, and the weapon could destroy its own ship. That level of risk suggests expertise. Now imagine that expertise shrinking over generations. Imagine fewer naval battles, fewer training exercises, fewer master engineers passing knowledge to apprentices. The Byzantine Empire faced repeated internal crises in its later centuries. Civil wars drained resources. Territory shrank. Economic strain intensified. When a state weakens, specialized military knowledge becomes harder to maintain. And then we reach the final confrontation. In 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II besieged Constantinople, there is no reliable evidence that large-scale naval Greek fire projection systems were deployed in the decisive battles. Instead, Ottoman cannons pounded the land walls. Gunpowder had become the dominant technology. Ironically, it was a new chemical revolution, explosive powder, that replaced the old one. And here lies the tragic symmetry. Greek fire once protected the city from naval invasion, but it could not protect it from artillery. The empire that once mastered flame on water fell to thunder on land. After 1453, any remaining custodians of the formula would have faced displacement, death, or absorption into Ottoman administration. If the knowledge survived at all, it did not survive in recorded form. No preserved Ottoman manuscript reveals the Byzantine naval siphon system. No Renaissance chemist rediscovered the exact process. It simply fades from documentation, and that absence is telling, because if Greek fire had been widely understood beyond Byzantium, it would have appeared elsewhere in identical form. It did not, which means the formula was either more fragile than legend suggests, or more guarded than we ever imagined. And that is the climax of this story. Not a fiery explosion, but a silence. A weapon powerful enough to shape centuries, gone without a traceable recipe. So what did Greek fire truly change? It did more than burn ships. It altered the balance of civilizations. When the first Arab siege failed in 678, the Byzantine Empire secured breathing space. That survival allowed Constantinople to remain a political and cultural anchor between East and West. When the Second Great Siege in 717 to 718 collapsed under Byzantine resistance, aided once again by incendiary weapons, the Caliphate redirected its focus elsewhere. Historians often debate how far-reaching those consequences were. But consider this. Had Constantinople fallen in the 7th or early 8th century, Europe's geopolitical development might have unfolded differently. The Byzantine Empire preserved classical learning, Roman administrative structures, and Christian theological traditions that later influenced medieval Europe. Greek fire did not create that preservation, but it helped secure it. For centuries, the empire's naval dominance deterred maritime invasions. Trade routes remained partially under Byzantine control. Imperial authority endured long enough to transmit knowledge into the medieval world. In that sense, Greek fire was not merely a weapon. It was a shield for continuity. And yet, its disappearance reveals something uncomfortable about power. The Byzantines treated the formula as a monopoly. It was guarded by emperors, hidden from allies, restricted to specialized corps. That strategy worked, until the empire weakened, because knowledge that exists only within narrow channels becomes vulnerable to disruption. When the political center collapses, so does centralized knowledge. Contrast this with other medieval innovations. Gunpowder, for example, spread rapidly across cultures. Originating in China, it traveled through trade networks and warfare into the Islamic world and Europe. It was adopted, modified, and scaled. Its survival did not depend on a single empire. Greek fire did. And that difference matters. The Byzantines believed secrecy ensured superiority. In the short term, they were correct. In the long term, secrecy ensured fragility. By the time Constantinople fell in 1453, the empire had already diminished into a shadow of its former self. Naval power was limited. Resources were scarce. The infrastructure necessary to maintain complex incendiary projection systems may have been gone. Even if fragments of the formula survived, the system did not. And without the system, the knowledge was incomplete. Today, chemists can speculate, historians can analyze texts, engineers can reconstruct hypothetical siphon systems. But no definitive blueprint remains. The weapon that once defined Byzantine naval supremacy has become a case study in lost technology. Not because humanity regressed, but because preservation failed. And that is the deeper resolution of this story. Greek fire did not vanish because it was mythical. It vanished because it was political. It was tied to an empire. And when that empire fractured, so did the chain of transmission. History often celebrates invention. It rarely warns about disappearance. Greek fire forces us to confront both. Today, Greek fire occupies a strange place in history. It is neither pure legend nor fully understood science. Modern researchers approach it with caution. Chemical reconstructions have attempted to recreate petroleum-based mixtures that burn on water. Experimental archaeologists have tested siphon-style projection systems. Some reconstructions work, but none can claim with certainty this is the formula, and that uncertainty is revealing. Greek fire challenges the modern assumption that technological progress is linear and cumulative. We often believe that once humanity discovers something, it becomes permanent, stored in libraries, digitized, archived. But Greek fire reminds us that knowledge can disappear, not because it was impossible, but because it was too concentrated, too restricted, too entangled with a single political structure. Historians such as John Haldon argue that the real innovation of Greek fire was organizational, the Byzantine state's ability to integrate chemistry, naval engineering, and disciplined deployment. In modern terms, it was a systems weapon, and systems collapse when institutions collapse. This makes Greek fire deeply relevant. In our own era, advanced technologies, from cyber systems to artificial intelligence, are often concentrated within powerful institutions. If those institutions falter, what fragments survive? Future historians may one day examine our own age and ask similar questions. They may know that we possessed extraordinary capabilities. They may find documentation of effects. But if transmission breaks, will they know how we did it? Greek fire stands as a reminder that technological dominance is not only about invention. It is about continuity. It is about sharing versus hoarding. It is about whether knowledge is embedded broadly across society or locked behind imperial doors. The Byzantines mastered flame upon water, but they did not ensure its survival beyond themselves. And that is the enduring lesson. Greek fire burned for centuries. It saved an empire. It terrified fleets. And then it vanished. No surviving recipe. No preserved workshop. No definitive reconstruction. Only fragments of description and the memory of flames on water. If this story changed how you see medieval history, if it revealed how fragile even the most powerful technology can be, then make sure you're part of this journey. Because history is not just about what was invented, it's about what was lost. Next time, we'll explore another mystery of vanished knowledge, an ancient machine buried beneath the sea that may have functioned as the world's first computer. A device so advanced, scholars once refused to believe it was real. And like Greek fire, it disappeared, until it resurfaced centuries later. In the end, no one saw the formula burn. There was no final battle where the last engineer guarded a hidden scroll. No dramatic moment where the recipe was thrown into flame. Instead, Greek fire faded the way most knowledge fades. Quietly, a workshop closed. A naval corps dissolved. An empire weakened. And somewhere in that slow unraveling, the last full understanding of how to make fire burn upon water slipped from human memory. The sea that once ignited beneath Byzantine prows now lies calm. Ships pass over the Bosporus unaware that, centuries ago, flame once raced across these waters. Greek fire is gone, but its lesson remains. Power can protect a civilization. Secrecy can preserve an advantage. But if knowledge is not shared, not renewed, not sustained beyond the lifespan of power, it disappears. And history moves on, leaving only embers in the archives. The flames are gone. The mystery remains.